I stood in my kitchen, still wearing the dress I bought for her wedding. I'd imagined that moment 1,000 times, the way she'd turn and smile when she saw me, how we'd both cry together as I pinned the necklace around her neck, how I'd hold her hand and whisper, "You'll always be my baby." But none of that came true. Instead, she told me not to come. Her voice was cold, direct. "Mom, I think it's better if you don't come." No explanation, no discussion, just those words. The house felt too quiet that morning, an eerie silence that made my ears ring. I kept glancing at the clock, even though I knew the ceremony had already begun. I made a pot of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink and wrapped a gift I would never give. The silence pressed in on me like a second skin. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the kitchen table, trying to anchor myself to something, anything. I told myself maybe she'd call, maybe there had been a mistake, maybe this wasn't really happening. But it was, and the silence only grew louder. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. I almost didn't answer. I was still in the same dress, though now it felt as if it belonged to someone else. Slowly, I opened the door, expecting a neighbor or a delivery. But there he was, Caleb, my daughter's new husband. He was still in his wedding suit, though his tie was gone and the top buttons of his shirt were undone. He looked exhausted, lost. And he didn't say hello. He just said, "Can we talk?" Before all of this, before the silence, before the heartbreak, before the wedding that happened without me, there was love. Real, undeniable love. The kind that runs so deep in your bones you think it could never be lost. That was my life with Ariel. She was my only child, born during a thunderstorm after 14 hours of labor and 5 years of fertility struggles. When I held her for the first time, her tiny fingers curled around mine as though they had been waiting for me. From that moment on, it was just the two of us against the world. I raised her alone. Her father left before she could speak her first word. I never spoke ill of him, not once. I wanted her to believe in love, to believe in loyalty. I worked 2 jobs most of her childhood, teaching 2nd grade by day, tutoring in the evenings just to keep us afloat. Every science fair project, every piano recital, every birthday cake shaped like a castle or a cartoon princess, I was there. Even when money was tight, she never knew. Her world was soft and safe, and I made sure of that. We were close, the kind of close where we had Friday night rituals, matching pajamas, popcorn, and a new movie every week. The kind of close where she would crawl into my bed at midnight during thunderstorms, even at 15, and whisper just until it passes. She was always bright, kind, and quick to laugh. She had her father's eyes, but not his silence. She used to tell me everything. At least, she did once upon a time. I remember the first day she brought Caleb home. She was 24, glowing, confident. Caleb was polite, soft-spoken, and kind in a quiet way. I liked him immediately, not just because he treated her well, but because he listened when she spoke. His eyes followed her, like he was trying to memorize her. And maybe that's why I never questioned anything. I trusted her choices. I trusted us. When they got engaged, I cried, not out of sadness, but because it felt like the start of a new chapter, one that we would share together. I pictured us planning the wedding side by side. I'd help her pick out her dress, walk with her through venues, share in the chaos and laughter. I started a little notebook with ideas, quotes, and vendors. I didn't want to be overbearing, just helpful. I even bought her a necklace, a delicate gold chain with a tiny heart-shaped charm, engraved with the words, "Always your mom." I wanted to give it to her the morning of her wedding. We even looked at flower arrangements together once. She had come over with a wedding magazine, plopped down at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, and we spent an hour flipping through pages, circling our favorites. That moment, just her and me, giggling about centerpieces and color palettes, felt like the old days. I held on to that memory, not knowing it would be the last time she'd ask for my input. In the months that followed, something changed. At first, I thought it was just wedding stress. She stopped calling as often, skipped our weekly coffee dates, and replied to my texts with short, clipped messages. I didn't push. I thought she'd come back around. Looking back now, I realize I ignored the shift. I didn't want to believe it was real. I didn't want to believe that the closeness we had, the bond we built over decades of just us, could be so fragile. But in that quiet time, before everything unraveled, I was still hopeful. I would picture the moment I'd watch her walk down the aisle. I'd imagine her squeezing my hand before she said her vows. I even practiced a short speech in front of the mirror one night. I thought it would be a moment we'd both treasure, a full circle moment between a mother and daughter who had weathered everything together. I didn't know then that I was being written out of a story I helped build. I didn't know I was becoming a stranger in the most important chapter of her life. The change was subtle at first, almost invisible if you weren't paying close attention. But mothers always notice, even when we pretend we don't. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. Ariel had invited me to brunch with Caleb's parents at a trendy little place downtown. I was excited, not just to see her, but to feel included again. It had been weeks since we'd spent time together, and part of me hoped this was her way of pulling me back in. The restaurant was bright and modern, full of natural light and fake ivy on the walls. We sat at a round table by the window. Caleb's parents, Richard and Marcia, were already seated when I arrived. They were dressed to the nines, with Marcia wearing designer sunglasses she didn't take off, even indoors. Caleb stood to greet me. Ariel didn't. "Mom," she said flatly, "you made it." It was the way she said it, not quite cold, but distant, like I was an obligation rather than someone she had been looking forward to seeing. I smiled through it. Wouldn't miss it. The server brought menus, and I asked if they had a vegetarian option, something light. Marcia scoffed under her breath and said, "Oh, another one." Ariel chuckled nervously, but didn't say anything. I brushed it off. I didn't want to make a scene. We started talking about the wedding. Caleb mentioned that they had just finalized the guest list. I perked up, excited. "Did you decide on a florist yet?" I asked, pulling a small pamphlet from my bag. One of my old students started a flower business, and her arrangements were absolutely gorgeous. "We've got it under control," Ariel cut in, her voice sharp and immediate. The smile on my face froze. I looked at her, surprised. The pamphlet in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous. I started to explain. "I know," she said, not unkindly but firmly, "but it's really something we've already figured out." The table fell silent. Caleb looked down at his plate, and Marcia raised an eyebrow, taking a sip of her mimosa. That was the moment I knew. The moment I realized something had shifted, something I couldn't undo. I folded the pamphlet and tucked it back into my bag, my cheeks burning. But I laughed softly to play it off. "Of course," I said. I didn't mean to step on any toes, but something inside me cracked. It wasn't just what she said, it was how quickly she dismissed me. Like my opinion didn't matter, like my excitement was something to be embarrassed about. That night, I sat on my couch, replaying the moment over and over. It had seemed small at first, almost trivial. But the more I thought about it, the more it unsettled me. She had always been respectful, even when we disagreed. Even in her teenage years, when we fought over everything from curfews to grades, she never cut me off like that. I wondered if it was wedding stress or maybe she was trying to impress Caleb's parents, who clearly viewed me as someone beneath their social tier. Still, it stung. In the days that followed, I noticed other small things. She stopped sending me updates about the wedding. I found out about her bridal shower through a photo someone else posted online. When I commented, "Looks like a beautiful day," she didn't even reply. I told myself not to take it personally. I reminded myself that she was busy, overwhelmed, and maybe leaning more on Caleb's side of the family to balance the load. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. But it lingered. The moment at brunch, the way she looked at me, the speed with which she shut me down like I was stepping out of place in a life I'd spent 2 decades helping her build. It was the first time I questioned my role in her new world, the first time I wondered if I had already been replaced. After the brunch, things didn't return to normal. In fact, they got quieter, eerily so. It wasn't just that Ariel stopped sharing updates about the wedding. It was like she had started erasing me, one layer at a time. Calls became sporadic. Texts turned into one-word replies. She stopped saying, "I love you," at the end of phone conversations. I didn't realize how much I cherished those 3 words until they were gone. I tried to stay involved, gently, without overstepping. I sent her a picture of my old wedding veil, asking if she'd like to use it as her something old. It had been in our family for 3 generations. She didn't reply for 3 days. When she did, it was a simple, I'm going with something different. No explanation, no thanks, just finality. I asked if she needed help addressing invites. She told me they were already handled. I offered to host a small get-together for her college friends. It's just not the vibe we're going for, she said, smiling as if trying to make it sound polite. But her eyes didn't match her mouth. One afternoon, I stopped by her apartment with a basket of baked goods and a small box of childhood mementos I thought she might want to use for the wedding photos, a pressed flower from a camping trip, her kindergarten drawing of us holding hands. Caleb answered the door. He looked uncomfortable. She's not really feeling up to visitors right now, he said. I offered to just leave the basket, and he nodded. That was it. The box was returned to me a week later, untouched. The silence didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly until I realized we hadn't had a real conversation in over a month. No more updates. No more, Mom, what do you think? No questions. No warmth. She stopped needing me, or maybe she stopped wanting me. I kept trying to find excuses for her. Maybe it was Caleb's influence. Maybe she felt pressure to grow up and separate. Maybe Marco was feeding her ideas about how things should look. But deep down, I knew that I started to worry that something else was happening. Something I didn't understand and couldn't reach. I began questioning myself. Had I been too involved, too emotional, too traditional? I replayed every interaction from the past year, searching for the moment I might have pushed too hard or asked too much. I began doubting my instincts, my memory, my worth. I cried more than I cared to admit. Mostly in bed, mostly at night, always with the door closed. I didn't want friends to know. I didn't want anyone to say that's just how daughters are, because it had never been like this between us. I started feeling like a ghost in her life, someone who had once been vital but had quietly faded away without anyone noticing. The worst part wasn't the exclusion, it was the rewriting. I heard from a mutual friend that Ariel had told her bridal party, "My mom just isn't part of this season of my life." That sentence shattered me, as if I had chosen to step back, as if I had voluntarily become irrelevant. I went from being the center of her world to a footnote. But I still smiled when people asked about the wedding. I still told neighbors how excited I was for her. I still bought gifts, little things like candles, slippers, spa gift cards. I kept them in a drawer in my bedroom. I didn't know if I'd ever get to give them to her, but it made me feel close. Some nights, I'd lie in bed, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Her graduation, her birthdays, the vacation we took to Seattle when she was 16. I'd watch videos of her dancing in the kitchen, singing in the car, sneaking up behind me and yelling, "Boo," just to make me laugh. In those moments, I felt like I was mourning someone who was still alive. I hadn't lost my daughter to tragedy or illness. I was losing her to distance, cold, intentional distance. And it was a kind of grief I never expected to feel. Then came Thursday evening. The humiliation arrived quietly, sharply, delivered in the most intimate way possible, not with screaming or confrontation, but with laughter. It started with a ding on my phone. I was cooking dinner, lentil soup, something warm to fill the empty space growing inside my chest. I glanced at the screen and saw I'd been added to a group chat titled Ariel's Bridal Babes. My heart fluttered. I thought maybe this was her way of looping me back in. Maybe she missed me too. I opened the chat.at first. It was just pictures, bridesmaids trying on dresses, someone posting a mood board of color schemes, a screenshot of Caleb and Ariel dancing in their living room, smiling wide. Then came the messages, dozens of them from girls I barely knew, bridesmaids, cousins, old roommates. Some of them had met me once, maybe twice, but they were talking about me like I was a category, a problem. Ari said her mom is going to lose it if she's not front and center during the vows. Classic overbearing mother energy. Just let the girl have her day. I swear if she wears white, I'll scream. Someone please make sure she doesn't do anything weird. Is she even still coming? Ari doesn't even talk about her anymore. My throat closed. I scrolled back up, my hands trembling. It was like peeling back a curtain and finding a party you weren't invited to, but where you were still the main topic of conversation. They didn't know I was there. Someone must have added me by accident, and there, in between the jokes and emojis, was my daughter's reply. She means well, but she's just too much sometimes. Everything turns into a guilt trip with her. I honestly don't have the energy. I stopped breathing for a second. I read the message again. Then again. I stared at it, hoping the words would change. But they didn't. They were hers. And they were honest. I wasn't angry. I was hollow. This wasn't just a private message. This was a room full of people laughing at me behind closed doors. People who had never sat with me through nights of fevers, school projects, breakups. People who didn't know how hard I had worked to make her childhood feel whole. And my daughter, she was the one leading the laughter. In that moment, I didn't know where I fit anymore. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, intentional. I had been erased, rewritten into something I didn't recognize. But the hardest part wasn't the way she saw me. It was the way she no longer saw me at all. The girl I once rocked to sleep while humming lullabies had given them permission. I sat on the kitchen stool, the soup boiling over on the stove behind me, hissing and bubbling, but I didn't move. I just stared at the phone in my lap. I didn't reply. I didn't leave the chat right away. I just read every message line by line until the pain became a tangible weight. Eventually, I stood up, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and quietly left the group. I didn't call her. I didn't send a dramatic message. I didn't cry that night. I just felt small, like I had become the punchline of a story I thought I was helping to write. The next morning, I opened my closet and stared at the dress I had bought for the wedding. It was a soft blush color, elegant and simple, exactly what she used to say she loved. I had chosen it carefully, wanting to look beautiful, but not overshadowing her, wanting to belong. But suddenly, that dress felt like a costume, a disguise for someone who no longer had a role. That weekend, I received a text from Ariel, no apology, no mention of the group chat, just, "Hey, just confirming you don't need to be added to the seating chart, right?" That was it. Just logistics. I typed out a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted it again. I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't sound bitter or broken. In the end, I just replied, "Yes, I won't be attending. I wish you a beautiful day." That night, I cried into my pillow like a child, not because of the cruelty, but because I had finally accepted the truth. She didn't want me there. I didn't pack a suitcase. I didn't slam a door. There was no dramatic exit, just stillness. After the group chat, after her text confirming my absence, I realized there was nothing left to fight for. I hadn't been invited to her wedding in any real sense. Not emotionally, not respectfully, and now not even physically. So I let go. Letting go wasn't immediate. It was a series of quiet decisions that felt like defeats at first. I deleted the folder on my computer labeled wedding ideas. I folded the dress I had bought and placed it back in the garment bag, then slid it under my bed. I took the necklace I had planned to give her, the one I had made for my mother's wedding ring, and locked it back in the box, the velvet cradling it like something sacred and unwanted. I walked into the guest room, which I had lovingly decorated in soft lilacs, thinking she and Caleb might stay there for a night after the wedding. I folded the towels I had laid out, removed the scented candles, and undid the small acts of hope I had stitched into that space. I didn't tell anyone, neither my friends, nor the neighbors who had been asking if I was excited, nor even my sister who had called weeks ago saying she'll come around. Daughters always come back to their mothers. I didn't need anyone's comfort. I needed space to grieve, to understand, and maybe to begin accepting that the person I had raised with so much love had turned into someone I didn't quite recognize. The day of the wedding came. I woke up at 6 a.m. I hadn't set an alarm. My body just knew. The house was too quiet, even for a Saturday. Outside, the sunlight felt too golden, too soft for the ache in my chest. I made a pot of coffee and didn't drink it. I stood in the kitchen, wearing that same blush-colored dress, not because I planned to go, but because I needed to see what she chose to reject. I stood there for hours, not moving much, just listening to what? I don't know. Maybe to the sound of nothing. I imagined her walking down the aisle. I imagined people smiling, music playing, cameras flashing. I wondered if Caleb looked happy. I wondered if she thought of me at all. And then I wondered if it mattered anymore. By noon, I changed into pajamas. The dress went back under the bed, and I threw a blanket over it, as if that would muffle its memory. I sat on the couch and stared out the window. There was no movie-worthy moment, no unexpected text, no knock at the door. Just a slow, steady heartbreak. And through all of that, I said nothing. There was a time I would have begged, written a long letter, demanded an explanation. But I couldn't do that anymore, not because I was too proud, but because I was too tired. When someone shows you clearly that they no longer see your value in their life, you stop offering them more pieces of your soul to discard. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. What I felt was something deeper, quieter, like walking out of a room you helped build and realizing the door has already been closed. Behind me, in that silence, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I lit a candle in the center of the living room, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat down. Not to cry, not to plead with the universe, but simply to be still with myself. I thought about who I used to be before motherhood consumed me, before my entire identity was wrapped around being someone's mom. I tried to find that woman again. The one who liked journaling, who took long walks after work, who painted, even if she never finished anything. And somewhere in the stillness, I made a quiet vow to her. If I was being written out of someone else's story, I better start writing my own. I didn't need a seat at the wedding. I needed a seat at my own table. The one I had forgotten to set for myself all these years. The day after the wedding felt heavier than the day itself. There was no event to brace for, no hope to quietly suffocate, no illusion left to polish. The finality had settled in. Ariel was married, and I hadn't been there. I hadn't walked her down the aisle. I hadn't seen her say I do. I hadn't watched her dance under twinkling lights, smiling like the child I used to know. I had been erased. Sunday mornings used to be my favorite. Growing up, Ariel and I had a ritual. Pancakes with strawberries, jazz music humming softly in the background, the two of us in fuzzy socks, laughing at nothing. Sometimes I'd catch her dancing in the kitchen, holding a spatula like a microphone. I loved those mornings more than she'll ever know. But this Sunday there was no music, no strawberries, just silence. The kind that presses down on your chest like a weight you can't shake off. I wandered the house aimlessly, the quiet clinging to me, thick and unrelenting. I picked up the phone twice to call her. My fingers hovered over her name. But what would I even say? Congratulations. I miss you. Why did you do this? Instead, I scrolled through social media. Her wedding photos were already up. Perfect lighting. Her dress like something out of a magazine. Caleb smiling beside her. The caption read, "The best day of our lives." There were hundreds of comments. "You look stunning. Such a beautiful couple. So happy for you both." Not a single mention of me. Not one. But what truly broke me was the image of her and Marka, Caleb's mother, hugging tightly, both beaming, cheeks pressed together like they'd known and loved each other for decades. The caption under that photo read, "My second mom. Thank you for making everything so magical." I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. My second mom. As if I had been the temporary one. As if everything I'd done, the scraped knees I bandaged, the birthdays I stretched every penny to make special, the nights I stayed awake beside her feverish little body whispering, "You're okay, I'm right here, none of it mattered now." I walked to the kitchen and opened the fridge, searching for something to fill the void. There it was, the 3-tiered cake I had made the day before, my own version of celebrating from afar. Chocolate with raspberry filling, her favorite. I had planned to slice it, light a candle, and make a toast in her honor, just me and my memories. But I hadn't touched it. Now I couldn't bear to look at it. I pulled it out and tore off the lid. I carried the cake to the trash, not bothering to slice it, not even trying to save a bite. I dropped the whole thing, decoration, care, love, all of it buried in plastic and shame. Then I sat on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, my legs pulled in, and I let myself sob, not the quiet tears I had been swallowing for weeks, but raw, aching sobs, the kind that empty your lungs and shake your shoulders. I cried for the daughter I raised, for the relationship we lost, for the years I gave so freely, only to be treated like an afterthought. I cried for myself because I had done everything I could. I hadn't been perfect, what mother is, but I had been present, loving, devoted. I had tried to show up in every way I knew how, and still, it hadn't been enough. Eventually, I pulled myself off the floor and dragged a blanket to the couch. I curled up with it like a shield, my face puffy, my throat sore, my head pounding. I stared at the ceiling for hours, not thinking, not feeling, just existing. That night, I had a dream. I was sitting on a bench in a garden. Ariel was a little girl again, 5 or 6, wearing a sunflower dress and clutching a daisy in her hand. She looked up at me and asked, "Are you okay, Mommy?" I couldn't answer. I just reached for her, but she slipped away, running into a fog I couldn't follow. I woke up sobbing, the blanket tangled around my legs like chains. That was the moment I knew I had reached my bottom. There was no lower to go, only forward. The morning after the dream, I woke up feeling hollow, my eyes crusted with sleep and tears. I moved like someone twice my age, slow, deliberate, careful not to disturb the ache that had taken root in my chest. I didn't make coffee. I didn't shower. I just sat at the kitchen table in silence, staring at the wilting flowers on the windowsill. I told myself I needed to clean, not just the house, but the grief, the heaviness, the reminders of everything I had hoped this week would be. I started in the hallway closet, pulling out gift bags, ribbons, tissue paper, things I had bought in anticipation. I threw them into a plastic bin, sealing them away without ceremony. Then I reached the last item, a small lavender box, hand-wrapped with cream ribbon. The necklace, the one I had planned to give Ariel the morning of her wedding. I had almost forgotten about it. My heart thumped as I held it, not because I thought she would still want it, but because I suddenly remembered what was inside, besides the jewelry. I sat down slowly on the couch, carefully untying the ribbon as if it still mattered. Inside was the necklace, tucked into soft white velvet. A delicate gold chain with a heart-shaped pendant engraved with the words, "Always your mom." But it wasn't just the necklace I had placed in there. Beneath the padding, folded into 4 tight squares, was a letter, one I had written weeks earlier, a letter I had forgotten about in all the noise of rejection and hurt. I pulled it out and unfolded it slowly, the paper crinkling between my fingers. It was written in my neat handwriting, the kind I used when I wanted every word to be perfect. Dear Ariel, today you become a wife, a partner, a co-pilot in someone else's life. And while I know that role is sacred and beautiful, I hope you never forget the one you've always had, as my daughter. From the moment I first held you, I knew I would spend my life protecting you, cheering for you, and loving you in every way I knew how. Every late night cry, every scraped knee, every story you whispered into my shoulder, they're stitched into my soul. You are my heartbeat in motion. I know I haven't been perfect. I've made mistakes, miscues, said the wrong things at the wrong time. But never once has my love for you faltered, not for a second. This necklace holds a piece of me and of your grandmother too. Her wedding ring was melted into the charm, so you'd carry both of us with you. Not because you need reminders of the women who came before you, but because you deserve to know the strength you carry comes from somewhere real. I don't know where your new life will take you, but I hope you'll always find your way back to me. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Because love, the real kind, has space for roots. I folded the letter carefully, placing it back in the box beside the necklace. For a moment, I just held the box in my hands, letting the weight of everything settle around me. It wasn't just the words on the page. It was the love, the hope, the years I had invested. And in that quiet, I made another vow to myself. I was going to move forward, not for her, but for me and Wings with all my heart, Mom. My hand trembled as I read the words aloud, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. I had written them in a moment of hope, of warmth, when I believed there would still be space for me in her next chapter. But now, reading them felt like a message from a version of myself that hadn't yet understood what was coming. Yet, somehow, it didn't make me feel foolish. It made me feel grounded. That letter wasn't for Ariel anymore. It was for me. It reminded me of the mother I had been, the love I had given so freely, the legacy I had carried from my own mother and tried to pass on. The pain hadn't erased that. Her silence hadn't undone it. I placed the letter back in the box, but kept the necklace out. I clasped it around my neck, my fingers fumbling through the tears. The charm sat right in my heart, light and warm against my skin. It didn't feel like surrender. It felt like reclamation. I wasn't just a mother who'd been pushed away. I was a woman who had loved deeply, sacrificed boldly, stood alone in her pain, and still chose to carry her head high. The letter reminded me that my story wasn't over. It had just turned a page. Something shifted after I read the letter, not like a lightning bolt or grand revelation, but quieter than that, softer, like the slow, steady feeling of a door creaking open after being locked for too long. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was drowning. I stood up, walked to the mirror in the hallway, and looked at myself, really looked. My eyes were swollen, my skin pale, my posture slouched under weeks of emotional weight. But I saw something else too. A flicker, a pulse, a woman still standing. I hadn't realized how far I had drifted from myself. Motherhood had been my identity for so long that I had lost track of the woman underneath. I had stopped doing things for me, stopped dreaming my own dreams. I had placed my worth entirely in how needed I was, and now that I wasn't needed or wanted, I had no idea who I was without that role. But the letter reminded me I was more than a mother. I was Leona. I used to love writing short stories, mostly nothing fancy, just scribbles in old journals. I remembered the thrill of building characters, crafting scenes, imagining lives that weren't my own. I used to sit on the porch in the evenings, writing until the sky turned purple. That day, I pulled out one of Benito's journals from a box in the garage. The pages were yellowed, but the ink was still clear. I flipped through them, smiling at how passionate I had been, how bold with words. My younger self had so much to say. Maybe she still did. I made a cup of tea, lit a candle, and sat at the kitchen table. Not to scroll through old photos, not to mourn what I had lost, but to write. The words came slowly at first, but they came. I wrote about a woman starting over after heartbreak. I wrote about strength blooming in quiet places. I wrote about dignity, the kind that doesn't scream or beg to be noticed. That afternoon turned into evening, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel empty. I felt present and alive. The next day, I went for a walk through the neighborhood. It was something I used to do regularly, but hadn't in months. The air was cool and crisp, the early signs of autumn peeking through the trees. I passed by houses with wind chimes, children playing on driveways, the scent of someone baking something sweet. Life was still happening. It hadn't paused just because I was grieving. At the corner cafe, I ran into an old coworker from the school where I used to teach. Her name was Mara, and we'd always shared a laugh in the break room about our student spelling disasters and lunchbox trades. She looked surprised to see me, but then her expression softened into warmth. "Leona, I've missed your face," she said, wrapping me in a quick hug. We chatted for a bit. She asked how I was doing, and I gave her the kind of honest but not too honest answer we give when the truth is still too raw. She nodded with understanding before we parted. She said, "You know, the district's looking for part-time reading tutors. You always had a gift with the kids who struggled. You should think about it." I smiled politely, but something inside me sparked, not because I needed the money, but because I missed feeling useful. Not in a self-sacrificing, one-sided way, but in a meant-to-be-there kind of way. That night, I pulled out my resume and updated it. I didn't tell anyone. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just wanted to reconnect with the part of me that knew how to give without disappearing. Day by day, I started rebuilding. I put music back in the house. Nothing dramatic, just soft jazz and a few songs from when Ariel was a child. I cleared out the drawer of gifts I'd hidden for her and repurposed them. I lit candles, not for nostalgia, but for warmth. I even started attending a writing group at the library on Wednesday nights. It was awkward at first, but I sat in the circle anyway, clutching my notebook like armor. No one knew what I'd been through, and that was okay. This wasn't about being seen. It was about remembering myself. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for an apology or reconciliation to feel whole. I was quietly, steadily finding my way back. Healing didn't come with fireworks. It came in whispers, in routines, in choices that seemed small but meant everything. I didn't announce what I was doing to anyone, not even to myself. I just started moving differently. Each morning, I woke up and made my bed with purpose. I opened the blinds and let the sun in. I stopped checking social media first thing, stopped looking at Ariel's post to see if I'd been mentioned, tagged, or remembered. I stopped chasing shadows. Instead, I created light. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at the public library, organizing Children's Story Hour. The first day, I thought it would break me, seeing little ones with eager eyes and wobbly voices, watching their mothers trail behind them, proud and exhausted. But it didn't break me. It soothed me. I read books aloud with energy I thought I'd lost. The children laughed, pointed at the illustrations, begged for just one more. I had forgotten how good it felt to be someone's favorite voice in the room, even just for a few pages. One little girl, Harper, clung to me every Thursday. She had pigtails and a tendency to interrupt stories with questions like, "But what happens if the dragon is lonely?" She reminded me so much of Ariel at that age, and it made my chest ache and swell all at once. I also applied for the tutoring job Mara had mentioned. I didn't think they'd want someone who had been out of the system for a few years, but within a week, I had a phone interview. By the end of the month, I was helping struggling second graders sound out words and build sentences. I'd forgotten how deeply satisfying it was to watch someone grow under your care. Not because you demanded it, but because you believed they could. At home, I began reorganizing everything, not frantically, not to fill time, but to reclaim the space. I donated boxes of clutter that had accumulated over the years, things I thought I'd save just in case Ariel needed them. That justification no longer held power over me. I was done preserving a space for someone who had walked away. I bought a new bookshelf and filled it with the things I loved: poetry, memoirs, old gardening books. I started writing again, not just journaling, but short stories. Some were about mothers, some were not, but they were mine. The necklace stayed around my neck. It no longer felt like a symbol of rejection. It felt like a quiet badge of survival. I also made practical decisions. I met with a lawyer and updated my will.it was something I'd been putting off for years. I didn't cut Ariel out completely, but I made it clear that my legacy wouldn't be dictated by guilt or obligation. I added charities I cared about, listed instructions for my journals, my letters, my stories. I wanted to be remembered on my terms, as a woman who loved deeply, but who also lived for herself. I didn't tell Ariel about any of it. I didn't send a message, didn't try to guilt her into reaching out. I let her silence be hers to own. But silence didn't mean I was idle. It meant I was rebuilding quietly and intentionally, preparing for a life that didn't revolve around being someone's safety net, someone's afterthought, someone's scapegoat. That I started keeping a calendar again. But this time, the entries were for me. Writing group, tutoring sessions, walks with a neighbor, an open mic night I told myself I might attend, even if I didn't read anything. I penciled them in like promises to myself. People began noticing. At the library, a retired professor asked if I'd ever considered publishing. At tutoring, a parent wrote me a thank you note for helping her son finally enjoy reading. At the grocery store, a stranger complimented my smile and asked what perfume I was wearing. I hadn't even realized I'd started wearing it again. It wasn't a makeover, it was a reawakening. There was no announcement, no social media post, no grand speech, just the slow, steady reclaiming of who I had always been beneath the ache, Leona. Not just Ariel's mother, but a woman who still had chapters to write. It began with a ripple, not a wave. One afternoon, as I left the tutoring center, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. At first it read, "Hi, Mrs. Leona. This is Sam from the wedding vendor team. Just wanted to follow up about the table arrangement you were supposed to approve." My thumb hovered above the phone screen. I stared at it for a moment, then replied simply, "I wasn't involved in the wedding." There was no response, just silence. But that single message stirred something in me. For the first time, someone outside my bubble had assumed I had been a part of my daughter's big day because they believed I should have been. That small assumption reminded me of something I'd forgotten. The world hadn't erased me. She had, and not everyone had agreed. Days later, I ran into an old friend, Denise, at the farmer's market. She had been invited to the wedding through mutual acquaintances and hadn't seen me there. Her face twisted in confusion. "I kept looking for you all night," she said. "I thought maybe you were late, or were you out of town?" I hesitated for a second, then decided I no longer needed to protect anyone. "She asked me not to come," I said. Denise blinked, her hand going to her chest. "Leona, I'm so sorry." She didn't ask why, didn't dig. She just stood with me in that moment, like a silent witness to a wound no one else had wanted to acknowledge. That night, something inside me settled, not healed, but steadied. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the exclusion. I had been shut out of a day that had once been ours. And the fact that others noticed, others cared, meant I wasn't invisible. Then came the silence from Caleb. He hadn't posted a single picture from the wedding. No glowing caption, no slideshow of their honeymoon, just stillness. At first, I assumed he was just private or maybe wrapped up in post-wedding life. But then I noticed something strange. He had stopped tagging Ariel in anything. In fact, his profile looked like the wedding never even happened. I didn't snoop often. I had made peace with the fact that she was living her life without me. But this caught my attention. It didn't look like a man freshly married. It looked like a man stepping back. A week later, I got an email from him. Just a line, "I'd like to talk. Would you be open to that?" I didn't respond right away, not because I was angry, but because I had learned to pause, to not rush into other people's messes without thinking. I read the email twice, then closed my laptop and went for a walk. By the time I returned, I knew my answer. I replied, "If you need to talk, I'll listen, but only if it's for the sake of truth, not guilt." He responded an hour later, "It is." The shift wasn't in the words. It was in the silence between them, the acknowledgement, the choice to come to me. Not out of obligation, but out of recognition. I didn't tell anyone about the emails. I didn't prepare myself for what he might say. I just waited. In the meantime, other things began to bloom. I was asked to lead one of the writing sessions at the library. The topic was narratives of loss and strength. I almost declined, but then I remembered who I had become these last few months. Someone who didn't run from her story anymore. At the session, I read a piece about a woman watching her child drift away. Not with cruelty, but with quiet indifference. I didn't use names, but the room felt heavy when I finished. Then came the applause, not loud, not performative, just enough to tell me that my pain had found resonance. Later, one woman approached me and whispered, "Thank you." I haven't spoken to my daughter in years, but today I felt less alone. The power was shifting, not because Ariel had changed, but because I had. The center of gravity was no longer her acceptance. It was my peace. I didn't need her permission to be whole. I didn't need her validation to know my worth. And as I stepped into each day a little taller, a little surer, I felt it. I wasn't just surviving the loss of a daughter. I was reclaiming the presence of a woman. Caleb arrived on a Sunday morning. The kind where the sky is too clear to predict what's coming. I had just returned from the library, a new book tucked under my arm and a half-drunk coffee in hand, when I saw him parked in front of my house. He was sitting in the car, engine off, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor him to his decision. He didn't notice me walking up until I tapped lightly on the window. He stepped out slowly, dressed simply in jeans and a gray hoodie, his eyes tired. He looked nothing like the polished groom from Ariel's wedding photos, just a man carrying something heavy. "Hi," he said, his voice soft. "Hi, Caleb." I replied, not cold, not warm, just open. "Would you like to come in?" He nodded. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had waited on her wedding day, the same chair even. He noticed the necklace around my neck. The charm rested at my collarbone. I didn't explain it. I didn't need to. "I don't know how to say this," he began, hands folded like a schoolboy waiting for discipline. "But I didn't come to apologize for Ariel. That's not why I'm here." I nodded. "Go on." He looked up, then down again. I read the letter. The one you wrote in the box. I stilled. I found it the morning after the wedding, he continued. She didn't open your gift. She didn't even bring it inside. It was in the car, underneath her shoes. I opened it because, I don't know, something didn't sit right with me. And then I read the letter and everything made sense. He took a breath. I knew there was tension between you two. She told me you were difficult, overbearing, that you were trying to control the wedding. And I believed her because, well, I thought I knew her. A silence hung between us, not heavy, just fragile. But that letter, he said, wasn't written by someone trying to control anything. It was written by a mother who loved deeply, fiercely, and who was hurting. I felt something twist in my chest. Not pain, not pride, just truth reflected back. She's been different, he said. He admitted, since the wedding, she's been cold, withdrawn. It's like she got what she wanted, but still, something feels missing. I've asked her about you. She shuts down. He met my eyes. I guess I came here because I needed to understand for myself, to see you, to hear your side, maybe. But mostly, to say that someone should have sooner. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just breathed. Thank you, I said, finally, for reading the letter, for coming. He nodded. I want to be clear, though, I added gently. I don't need you to speak for her, and I'm not asking you to fix anything. That's not your burden. I know, he said. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I made us tea, more out of habit than hospitality. He took his mug and looked around the kitchen, his eyes lingering on the small framed photo of Ariel as a child that still sat on the windowsill. She loved you so much, he said quietly. I think that's what scared her. I tilted my head. What do you mean? She told me once that you loved her so deeply. It felt like too much. Like she could never measure up to it. That she'd disappoint you eventually. I let the words settle. So she decided to disappoint me all at once. Caleb didn't reply. He didn't have to. I looked at him. This young man who had married my daughter, who had seen through her armor, who had come here not to make amends on her behalf, but to honor the truth she'd buried. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the affection, the disappointment, the questions. Whatever happens between you two, I said gently, remember that silence is its own kind of violence. And love without accountability can become cruelty. He nodded slowly, the words hitting somewhere deep. He stood, the mug still warm in his hand. Thank you for seeing me. I walked him to the door. We didn't hug. We didn't make promises. But before he left, he looked at me one more time and said, if I had known, I would have made sure you had a seat. I smiled, not bitterly, but with grace. I didn't need a seat at the wedding, Caleb. I just needed someone to see that I existed. He nodded once, then left. I closed the door behind him, not with anger, not with grief, but with clarity. 2 weeks after Caleb's visit, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten envelope with my name on it in Ariel's looping cursive. I stood in the hallway, holding it like it might burn. I didn't open it right away. I walked to the kitchen, made tea, and sat at the table, the same one where Caleb had told me I was seen. I traced the edges of the envelope, my heart pounding in my ears. Eventually, I peeled it open. The letter was short, less than a page, but every word pulsed with weight. Mom, I don't know how to start this. I've rewritten it 6 times. I keep thinking of what I'd want to hear if I were you. And honestly, I don't even know what that would be. But here's what I do know: I hurt you. I shut you out of something we were supposed to share, and I did it because I thought if I could just control everything around me, I wouldn't feel like I was falling apart inside. I was scared not of you, of not measuring up, of failing in front of you. You've always been so strong, so present, and somewhere along the way, I confused your love with pressure. I convinced myself that pushing you away would give me space to become my own person. But all I did was create a void, and I'm not proud of it. Caleb told me he visited you. He told me about the letter you wrote. I still haven't opened the gift. I can't yet, but I will. I promise. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just want you to know I see it now, what you gave, who you were, who you still are. And I'm sorry. Love, Ariel. I read it 3 times. My first instinct was to cry, but the tears didn't come. Not because I wasn't moved. I was, but because this wasn't the apology I'd been waiting for. It was more than that. It was accountability, not packaged in excuses, not softened with justification, just truth. Then, almost as if the universe was aligning itself with that moment, I received a call from the school district later that afternoon. The tutoring coordinator asked if I'd be open to coming on full-time next semester. "The kids adore you," she said. "You bring a calm that we don't see often." I told her I'd think about it. But in my heart, I already knew I'd say yes. I wasn't filling a void anymore. I was following a thread back to myself. But the biggest shift came 3 days later. A letter from my attorney arrived. Just a copy of the will revisions I had filed last month. I had almost forgotten about it. I glanced through the documents, flipping pages until I reached the section on personal items and inheritance. There, in black and white, was a note I had requested be included. The heirloom necklace may be passed on if the recipient demonstrates understanding of its meaning. Love without conditions, loyalty without performance, and presence without control. It wasn't meant as a punishment. It was a message, a boundary in the shape of a legacy. That weekend, I boxed up a few things. Old photos, the first story Ariel ever wrote in second grade, a recipe book she used to love. I mailed it all to her, no letter, no expectations, just pieces of our past returned without bitterness. A few days later, she posted a photo on her social media. Not of the wedding, not of Caleb. It was a photo of a worn-out children's book titled I Love You Forever. My handwriting was on the inside flap, to Ariel, who made me a mother. The caption read, "Some things take time to understand. I'm still learning." It wasn't loud. It wasn't public for sympathy or praise. It was quiet, real, like a door slowly creaking open. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like the story had ended with me on the outside. The justice wasn't revenge. It wasn't a confrontation or a dramatic reckoning. It was clarity, ownership, and finally, acknowledgement. Sometimes, the most powerful justice is simply being remembered rightly. It was a Tuesday evening when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in my contacts, and for a moment, I assumed it might be another school robocall or a telemarketer offering some insurance I didn't need. But something nudged me, an instinct, and I pressed accept. "Hi, Mom." The voice was soft, fragile, almost trembling. I recognized it immediately, not because of the tone, but because of the hesitation. It was the same voice that once whispered bedtime questions under a blanket fort, the same voice that once cried after scraping her knee on the playground. It was Ariel's voice, but stripped of its armor. I didn't say anything right away. My silence wasn't cold. It was careful, letting the moment land. She started. "I don't know if I should have called you." "You already did," I said gently. "So go ahead." There was a long pause, and then she exhaled. I could hear the air tremble. "Thank you for the package," she said. I cried when I opened it. I didn't think I would, but yeah. I smiled faintly. "They're just pieces of our life. You don't have to do anything with them." "But I want to," she replied quickly. I want to remember it. I want to understand what I forgot or ignored. I let her words settle in the space between us. I wasn't going to rush her. This wasn't a conversation to fill with noise. "I read the letter again," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "The one in the necklace box." I finally read it, and I couldn't stop crying, not just because of what you wrote, but because I realized how long it's been since I saw you as a person. Not just my mother, but Leona. The name hit me like a quiet bell. "You don't owe me anything," I said softly. "I mean that. This call, it's not a door you have to walk through unless you truly want to." "I do," she said, no hesitation this time. "I'm not ready to come over yet, or talk about everything. But I want to start somewhere. Maybe lunch? Somewhere neutral." "Of course," I said. "You name the place." "Next Saturday, there's that cafe we used to go to near the bookstore, Maple and Pine." I finished for her. "You love their cinnamon rolls." "Still do," she said, and for the first time in months, I heard her smile. The rest of the call was quiet, gentle, not packed with apologies or analysis, just a few memories, some small laughter. She told me Caleb had moved out for a while, not permanently, just to get some space and think. I didn't cry. That was her story to carry. When we hung up, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. I didn't cry. I didn't leap into hope. I just stood in my kitchen, the same place I had waited for her wedding day to pass, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to her, but to the moment, to the universe, to whatever part of her had softened enough to call. The following Saturday, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early. I wore the necklace, not to guilt her, but to ground myself. I chose a table by the window, ordered 2 coffees, and watched the door. When she walked in, I barely recognized her at first, not because she had changed physically, but because she looked different. Less polished, less rehearsed, more real. She spotted me, paused, then walked over slowly. She hugged me, not tightly, but not out of obligation either. It was a real hug, tired but real. We sat, and for the first few minutes we just drank coffee and watched the street outside. "You look good," she said. "So do you," I replied. And I meant it. She pulled something from her bag, a photo of us from her childhood. We were on a beach, wrapped in matching towels, grinning at the camera like we had just discovered the ocean for the first time. "I found this," she said, setting it between us. I don't remember the exact day, but I remember how safe I felt. I placed my hand beside the photo. "I remember that day. You built a sandcastle and cried when the tide took it away." She chuckled. "You told me, even if the castle washes away, you'll always know how to build it again." "That sounds like something I'd say," she nodded, her eyes glassy. "I forgot a lot of things, Mom. I want to remember them if you'll let me. I never stopped hoping you would. We didn't fix everything over coffee and cinnamon rolls. There were too many wounds for that. But we took the first step, not back to how things were, but forward into something honest. And that was enough." The following weeks passed with a rhythm that was neither fast nor slow, just steady, like a pendulum that had finally found its beat again. Ariel and I didn't become best friends overnight. We didn't dive into emotional unpacking or rush to repair every broken bridge. Instead, we allowed space to breathe, to observe, to feel things without forcing them. And in that space, something honest began to grow. She called me every few days. Sometimes we talked about work, books, or the weather. Sometimes we didn't talk at all, just sat on the line, silent and present. Once, she sent me a voice message of her walking past a bakery, laughing softly. "They were playing your favorite Ella Fitzgerald song. Made me think of you." That was all, but it meant more than any grand apology ever could. We met for walks, short ones at first, at a local park where mothers chased toddlers and elderly couples shared benches like secrets. We talked about small things, the color of the leaves, a dog she saw wearing sunglasses, a poem I had read the night before. Slowly, the wall between us crumbled, not from force, but from care. One Saturday morning, she arrived at my house unannounced, a cardboard box in her arms. I opened the door, surprised, and she stood there with a half smile. "I finally opened the wedding gift," she said, and the letter. She stepped inside and set the box on the table. Inside were pieces of her life, childhood artwork, postcards we had collected on road trips, her first diary. "I thought we could make a scrapbook together," she said. "Not because we're fixing the past, just to remember it together." We spent the day surrounded by glue sticks, construction paper, and memories. We didn't talk about what had happened. We didn't need to. The act itself was healing. Every picture we placed, every caption we wrote, was a piece of us being sewn back together. That night, after she left, I sat in the quiet of my home, the weight of the day settling over me. It wasn't about fixing what was broken. It was about accepting that we both needed time to heal, and that healing could happen in small, honest steps. I sat alone in the quiet house, the scrapbook laid open on the table. The pages were drying, photographs curling slightly at the corners. I traced one picture with my fingertip, Ariel, maybe 10 years old, sitting in my lap, both of us mid-laugh with a birthday cake in front of us. I didn't remember the joke, but I remembered the feeling, pure joy. I got up and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The same one I had stood in front of the day. I decided to reclaim myself. I looked at my reflection, not for vanity, but for truth. I saw a woman who had been broken not once, but repeatedly, and who chose not to stay broken. A woman who had loved with her whole being, lost without reason, and somehow found the courage to keep giving, anyway, not just to others, but to herself. In that moment, I realized I hadn't been waiting for Ariel's apology. I had been waiting to see me again. And I had. She had come back into my life, yes, but I had also come back into my own, not as the version of myself who lived only through motherhood, but as the woman who had held on through grief, grown through absence, and found her voice again through solitude. I went outside, wrapped in a shawl, and sat on the front porch. The wind was cool, rustling through the trees. The street was quiet, and the stars blinked above me like distant promises. I thought about the necklace around my neck, the heart-shaped pendant warmed by my skin. It had been meant for her. Maybe one day it still would be. But for now, it belonged to me, a symbol not of loss, but of resilience. The house no longer felt like a waiting room. It felt like home mine. As I sipped a mug of tea, I thought back to the words I had told her years ago on a beach, as she cried over a sandcastle the ocean had claimed. Even if the castle washes away, you'll always know how to build it again. That memory, once distant, returned now with a new truth, because I had rebuilt. Not the same shape, not the same pieces, but stronger, wiser, whole. And in the quiet of that evening, under a sky that asked for nothing, I finally understood. I hadn't lost my daughter. I had found myself, and that was enough.